My name is Sarah Boynton, and this is a movie about botanical arts to explain briefly, 45-minute briefly, about botanical arts. These are just the basics. If you want to delve deeply into this, there's a book now that we wrote, and information on that is on my website, which is sarahboynton.net. And the net proceeds go to the GCA to further the education of BA. So it is a benefit to all if you want to buy it. So starting out in the GCA flower shows, there are 5 divisions. Division 1, flower design. Division 2, horticulture, photography. And then again on Division 4 is botanical arts. Within that division, there are 4 subcategories. One is botanical couture, then botanical embellishment, forms, and then finally jewelry. So when you're looking at this, to begin with, the botanical couture, a design emulating an item of clothing and or fashion accessories created. The plant material may be artificially treated unless otherwise stated in the schedule. And what that means is that you can paint it with paint or nail polish, etc. No mechanics, if you use any mechanics underneath or anything to help structure of the piece, it needs to be hidden and it needs to be covered with plant material. So you can't have anything showing, if you will. Examples of this is this little shoe, this little purse, and of course this beautiful design by Leslie and Alice at the Newport Flower Show, this little Barbie doll. Isn't that pretty? And they're little miniature dresses. They're not very big. The next one is botanical embellishment, a man-made object enhanced with dried plant material. So the exhibitor is given an item and they're asked to cover it with plant material. Now, complete coverage of the object is not required unless it's stated in the flower show schedule. And the embellished objects need to remain recognizable and not to be completely obscured. So in other words, judges, if they're looking at it, they want to be able to see the original item that was given to the exhibitor before the embellishment was put on top. And here are some examples of this nice little paint board and a paintbrush and this box that was covered. Now, a lot of these examples are not my own. I'm using other people's because I love what they've done, and I try to get the best one for each example. Now, here's a great example of embellishment. These exhibitors were given a handbag, this little clutch, and each of these exhibitors did such a great job, and they're so very different. It's nice to see a comparison with given the same object here. It's just, I love all the creativity on that. Embellishment is partially covered and couture is entirely covered. So when people are putting together a class or writing a schedule rather, keep that in mind that embellishment is supposed to be partially covered where it's a man-made object, whereas couture is entirely covered. Next section is botanical forms, and basically it is a design of any other natural form, such as a flower or a bird's nest or an animal, etc., created from all dried plant material. Materials can be artificially treated, once again, with paint and so on, and then no mechanical structural base may be visible. So in other words, you cannot see your mechanics. Finally, we have botanical jewelry, which is created out of all dried plant material and made to resemble jewelry that is wearable, looks like it's wearable. It doesn't have to be wearable in both size and function. Again, no mechanics or structural base may be visible. So as far as the rules are concerned, you really need to check the GCA website to make sure you're up to date on the rules. But let me go over what we know as of 2025. All plant material must be dried. So this includes plants and what are not considered plants any longer, but fungi and algae. Under fungi, that includes mushrooms and lichen, and under algae, it includes seaweed and kelp. Those are allowed. You cannot use any artificial or locally invasive or endangered material. And that is in the state that the show is in. So in other words, in Massachusetts, if I were to make a design out of bittersweet, which is terribly invasive here, then it would not pass. You have to make sure and check the locally invasive list from the state that you're going to be exhibiting. Plant material may be processed, but only by the exhibitor. So in other words, you can't go to Lowe's and buy a dowel to create a heel of a shoe if you're making a shoe. But you could go into your backyard and take a branch or a stick and sand it into the shape of a heel by the exhibitor. You can do that yourself. The use of commercially processed material is also prohibited. So again, you can't go to a hardware store and buy a tile of cork or a skewer or a dowel. But there are some exceptions. We do allow natural raffia, not the plastic raffia, but the natural raffia. You're allowed to use rattan, which are the Middlena sticks that we like, but they are hard to find because they're no longer being manufactured. You can sometimes go on basket weaving sites and find rattan there. Skeletonized leaves are allowed, and rice, even white rice, is allowed. We also allow organic thread, as long as it's cotton or hemp, for stringing between beads or pearls of plant material. And it has to be plant material. You can't use silk. Mechanics may be used, but must not be visible. So in other words, you can use cardboard or wire, but you have to cover it with plant material. Gemstones must be made from plant material. There are some saps and resins from plants that you can use to create gems. Every once in a while, here's one, Indian white mahogany. You cannot use nail polish as a gem. You need to paint plant material to resemble gems. You can paint it with nail polish, but it just can't be all nail polish. It has to be just enhancing the plant material. A light coating of paint, nail polish, epoxy, and etc. is allowed on top of the materials. Decorative painting, where you're depicting scenes or figurines or faces, etc., is discouraged. We want you to use plant material to create the pattern. Plant material may be carved, cut, incised, or shaped to enhance artistic effect, but only by the exhibitor. So in other words, this dragon was done by cutting out all the negative space to create this cameo. But the judges do want you to put other plant material with that carved out piece. So in other words, again, this was done and then sesame seeds were applied and rattan on top of that before it was painted. Manufactured figural forms may not be used as a base material. You cannot go to the store and buy a turtle and then embellish it with plant material. We want to see the exhibitors to create the turtle out of either paper mache or clay and then enhance it with the plant material. What used to be called a key card is now called a sample card with the botanical and common names and properly use the nomenclature as listed in the GCA website, on the GCA website. And what we've done now and why we call it a sample card is that we're asking the exhibitor to note the location of the plant material within the design. So in other words, this exhibitor used rattan as links in her necklace. Exhibits must appear to be functional, which means necklaces need a clasp if they can't go over the head easily, and bracelets, etc. They do not have to be functioning. They just have to look like they work. They have to appear functional. For a brooch class, we do not expect a pin on the back of the pin because it will interfere with the staging. Embellished objects should remain recognizable and not be completely obscured. We are trying to get to the point where judges can see, for instance, this beautiful design. Everybody loved this design, but it was to be a canoe that was embellished, and you can't see the canoe anymore. And so judges are trying to see the original piece underneath the plant material. Speaking of judges, the way these are judged, same as floral design, is the principals and elements of design. So for the principles of design, we have balance, symmetrical or asymmetrical, contrast, dominance, rhythm, scale. And for the elements of design, we have color and form, light and line, pattern and size, space and texture. I love this shoe. I can't remember who did this. I apologize, but it is a shoe that I always get such a kick out of it because it's made out of, looks like pine cones, but it's made out of the outside of a pineapple. And I just love the idea of botanical arts because you're sitting there having breakfast one morning and you look over at your pineapple and you think, I can make a shoe out of that. I just love the ingenuity of this particular division. So the scale of points, we have GCA and NGC for most of our flower shows. There are a lot of flower shows that are non-sanctioned, and they have their own set of points that are listed on the flower show schedule. But for the most part, GCA and NGC, here they are. And if you look at this, they're very similar. The number one thing is the design. They want to see a great design. And obviously next is craftsmanship and so on. So how do you get started? First of all, you get the schedule and you need to read it over very carefully. I've had this problem before. As an example here, I was making this brooch for Philadelphia Flower Show, and the schedule was a brooch inspired by the decorative style of traditional Dutch pottery and tile. Well, I was going to send it. I couldn't go to the show that year, and when I was filling out all the forms, the name of the class is called polychrome. And I thought, I have no idea what that means. So I went into the dictionary, and it means painted, printed, or decorated in several colors. Well, of course, I had to get my paintbrush out and correct that because that would have been a mistake. So do read the schedule over very carefully. So when it comes to designing a piece, a lot of people ask me, how do you design it? There are two approaches for the most part, template versus inspiration. I tend to be more of a template person. I tend to draw out my design and then find the plant material that can achieve that size, shape, etc. And I'm not very good at drawing. I can't hand draw anything. So I use a computer program on my Apple Pages. You can use Publisher on Word and create your template. And then you just follow it with your design with the pieces that you find along the way. Or sand and manipulate the plant material to get the right shape. Whereas the other type of design approach is inspiration from the plant material. Here we have a great example. So Christina Kramer in Florida found this trumpet vine, and I know it's invasive in some areas, but not where she was sending this to Newport. And she saw this lovely pod from the trumpet vine and decided, I'm going to keep this for down the line when I try to make something I can find fun to use it. And she signed up for a letter opener in Newport, and here it is as an award winner and best in show. It's just fabulous. I love the way it was made, and it really came out nice. So prongs and bezels will add to the piece, where on the left here you have prongs holding the gem, and on the right is a bezel, which is another type of setting that would hold some sort of stone, etc. Again, I can't emphasize enough, you need to hide your mechanics, and you are allowed to use things like cardboard, metal, twine, etc. for construction, but it just can't show. And here we have an example of a tiara that I made early on, and you can see that I created the structure or the support out of wire on the left there, and then on the right, it is completely covered in plant material. Here I had a little bit of a problem with a necklace in Philadelphia. After I hung it up there, you could see a little bit of wire showing there, and I did get knocked down for that. So be very aware of what it looks like when it's in place. The other thing that has changed over the years, we used to not have a rule about replication of a design. We do now. This is an example. This is before the change, and this exhibitor took an ad from a magazine and replicated it in a design and did a great job, but now we no longer do that. I have done this in the past. This necklace here was, again, for Philadelphia, and it was something that Elizabeth Taylor might have worn. And I really loved the story behind this necklace. And if you have time, there's another video to hear about how I did this necklace and the history behind this pearl that I was fascinated about. And I really enjoyed making this. It got second place because they did see the mechanics, as I said, but also because they thought that the design was a little long for a necklace. But I did have to remind people that Elizabeth Taylor liked her designs to be quite low to emphasize her features, as in this picture. Judges like to have you do deconstruction and reconstruction, which is basically taking apart some things, plant material, and using them together to create your piece. So, in other words, you don't want to take a hydrangea blossom and just put that on your piece to create a flower. It's better to create the petals out of different material and so on. So, where do you get inspiration for your plant material? I look at nature, and you have to kind of look at it like Georgia O'Keeffe did. I love her paintings because she really had an eye and really looked very closely at plant material. Here is an example. I use rhododendron, and if you can see those little pieces, I am not a hort person. I'm sorry, I don't know stamens, etc. But that piece in the rhododendron makes for a great starfish. You can put the pieces together. Talk about deconstruct and reconstruction. Then we have a bud on this rhododendron that I used to create this headpiece that went to Hawaii. Now, funny thing, story on that one is that it was in the wintertime, so I had to take the blossom, the bud, and put it in the microwave with silica gel and dry it to be able to use it in the piece. Well, it went well until I had to do another one for the sample card. Every time I put it in the microwave, it would bloom. It would actually bloom. It would open up. And I had a dickens of a time trying to get the darn thing to keep closed. So it took about 6 tries. I finally did it, and I was laughing with my husband. I said, I don't think that rhododendron is going to look so good in the spring, but there it is. So these little tiny pieces here you can find in the wintertime even, and they're from the older blossoms, and they're very delicate, but they have a lot of movement, great rhythm, and they're great for antennae or legs of an insect and that kind of thing. Again, looking at things, the rhododendron leaves as well as magnolia leaves are great because they're so pliable and they stay in their shape. They don't shrivel too much when they dry. And you can use a hole punch to create little shapes like I did on this butterfly with the round holes there. Nowadays, you can find these hole punches in every shape imaginable. So you can just use your imagination. The sky is the limit on these. Dogwood is another great plant. And in the center where the flower is in the spring, you can pick these and dry them at different intervals. So this example at the top was from the same tree. And I literally just came out every single day and took a few samples so that I have a variety of shapes. And again, I tend to pay attention to the seasons, know that in early spring I want to go out and harvest the dogwood flowers. In the fall, I love to go get the pokeweed, etc. So just keep an eye on it. You don't have to be doing a project, just dry the material, store it, and then you have it when you need it. Bark is a great thing to use because you can use it as the back of something and you don't have to worry about covering it up because it is plant material. Pokeweed, as I just mentioned, I love pokeweed. You can go out in the fall and you harvest these and they can be you can drill a hole in it with a small drill bit and literally use it as a spacer here in this necklace. Almonds are fantastic. Gosh, I love these because you can sand them down with a very high grit, like an 800 grit sandpaper. And it just, you can create any shape you want, just about. The little heart and the little emerald is mine, but up there we have Jennifer who did this necklace for Newport. And literally, this is a hand that she carved out of an almond and then used, glued it to a eucalyptus pod. And it's fabulous. When it comes to almonds, though, you really have to seal them before you paint them because once you've sanded them and taken that protective coating off, they're very greasy, they're very oily. So you need to seal them with either a super glue or an epoxy or a clear coat, nail polish, that kind of thing, in order to give you a barrier between the grease or the oil and your paint or your nail polish. Soybeans are fantastic for pearls, they're great shape. And Andromeda, I love Andromeda. A lot of people don't grow them in their area. It's like a mountain laurel, and it has these little seed pods after they bloom. They dry, the bloom looks like this, and then they dry out and look like this. And they can create these little receptacles to receive diamonds or pearls or something like that. They're just fantastic. Eucalyptus, there's so many varieties. I like to dry them and keep them for later use. Seeded eucalyptus, you can pretty much get year round, and they're a great element to put into anything. There are little pieces here that I used. The cupped eucalyptus is like a year after the blossom, and it has this little reservoir that you can use to fill with ground sage or something and then color, paint with your nail polish to create a diamond. Now, this is that eucalyptus pod from Christmas I was talking about, and I used it to create that big pearl for the Elizabeth Taylor necklace. And they're fabulous because you can sand them and shape them, and I like to use them for just about anything. There's a silver bells eucalyptus that looks like a shell, and you can just use it as is. I love that. Then sesame seeds are fabulous because if you use them in mass like this, it creates this wonderful pattern. This looks like scales on a dragon, and I just really enjoy them in mass like that. Star anisette, great because you can create different shapes, sand them to look like a flower, etc. And I go to Asian markets and buy a huge bag of these because within that bag, you're going to find several very good examples of what you would want to use. Not all of them look great, so you have to get a big bag to go through them. I love this bracket tree fungus that you can get. You'll be walking, I love to snowshoe, so I'll be snowshoeing, and if I come to a tree that has one of these, I'll just grab it and put it in my pocket. And then I do bake it in the oven at 200 for about an hour or so to kill any of the worms or whatnot that you would bring in. You can sand them down. I'll show you a little later what I do. They sand down nicely. They're almost as hard as wood when I'm ready to get to them. And so you can create any shape. That cross that I did for Ireland there is mushroom, except for the little macadamia nut in the middle there and the raffia twists in there. Mustard seeds are tiny, but they are great and they are very effective in any application that I've used them for. There are two types. There's yellow mustard seeds and then there's brown mustard seeds, or black sometimes called them. And honestly, it's hysterical. If you think yellow mustard seeds are small, you should see the black ones. They're even smaller. Corn husks are great to use because you can hydrate them and shape them any way you want. There is a little bit of shrinking when they dry, so be careful to not make it too tight because when your design dries, you'll have gaps and so on. But look at the nice striations there in this dress. This is Sue Cram made these, and oh my, I love this dress. Just love this dress. Also skeletonized sleeves. She used them here on the left for a lace effect and used, some paint on the edges to give this fabulous flow in this dress. On the right, I used it to create lace in this fan that I made. Fruit rinds, again, you're having breakfast one morning and you look at your cantaloupe and think, I'm going to be making a clutch out of that. But Sue also made this. I just love this. This was in Philadelphia, won some nice awards several years ago. Another thing I like to use are dried gourds. You can dry them yourself. You can buy them on Etsy. This was a goose neck gourd that I had that dried hard, which was nice. I was able to cut out a piece and then I shape it and cut it with a jeweler's saw and create the base of this pin. When you're cutting your gourds and your cantaloupe, etc., keep the seeds and dry them. And when you go to use them, you can hydrate them. And they're a lot more pliable when they're wet, when they're hydrated. And you can cut out the middle and create all kinds of shapes like this one here with all these pieces that I put together and went just about blind with that to create this Maharaja's gem here that went to India for Wafa. Here's another piece that someone else made. I think it was Ann Scott. She made this, I believe. And I mean, if you look at the detail in this, you can see all the seeds that she used for this. White pepper is fabulous because it creates a small, round object, and you can create pearls or whatever you need. And they can be drilled like I did there to string them on this necklace. Of course, you sneeze the whole time you're drilling them. You can only imagine the size of the drill that I used for that. Macadamia nuts are also fun to use. They can be shaped, sanded, etc. And I love working with these. Again, they're oily, so you have to seal them. Raffia, I use this a lot. And again, it has to be the natural raffia. And if you twist it, I'll show you next with a drill, you can create these really thin pieces that can be shaped in any form and then dried. So when it comes to twisting raffia, what you first want to do is take your raffia and you tie a knot into the raffia, large enough so that the chuck on the drill bit here, with the drill, will be able to hold on to it. And you tighten that down. Of course, after I used this a few times, my husband got me a new one for Christmas. I don't think he liked all the glue on his. And you want to use a surface such as a granite or something that you can wash off afterwards because there will be some glue on the countertop. You tie a knot in the other side, on the other end of the raffia, and use a really strong tape such as Gorilla tape, such as what I use. For this, I'm going to show you Vanna here. We'll show you the tacky glue with warm water in a little disposable bowl, and you do this back and forth on the raffia. The reason is because this is a pliable glue when it dries, and what you can do is go back and forth, and the glue is there to help secure the twisting of the raffia, keep it in place, and also make it a little less brittle, like raffia can sometimes be. And the reason I'm going up and down with my hand like this is to pop any air bubbles that will be produced. Now for this video, I'm using a lot of different pieces of raffia. If you want a really small piece, you make a smaller piece and then it doesn't have this, it's not so large. When you're done, you secure the other end of the raffia that was in the drill. When it's mostly dry, you then twist the raffia around the dowel or the skewer if you have one and let it dry completely to give you the shape that you want, the circumference that you want. Rattan is another thing I love to use. You can hydrate them and create these wonderful shapes. Here's an example of letting it dry in a shape for this shoe, all these curves, etc. Once it's dry, the thing about rattan is that it's very porous. So if I were to spray paint this or paint this, the liquid, the moisture in the paint would seep into the rattan and cause it to change its shape, kind of do its own thing, if you will. So it's always advisable when you've got the shape you want to go back and there's a crazy glue with a brush that you can actually buy at Home Depot or somewhere. And you can paint the crazy glue and seal the rattan before you paint it. and it will hold its shape a lot better. Lentils are great as gems put into settings like this Andromeda that I was telling you about earlier. Norfolk Island pine, so much fun. Oh my gosh, I wish it grew around here, but it doesn't. It grows in the south and in Hawaii and places like that. Once you have hydrated it and shaped it and it's in its place and you, again, the way you want it, I'll go back with that crazy glue with a brush and seal it so that it retains its shape as well as helps keep it together. Crepe myrtle, we don't have them here. I wish we did, but I have a lot of friends that send me this and I am very grateful. And I love these. In fact, it looks like a setting for a gem or a pearl. So a lot of people ask me, what kind of tools do I use? Again, you can just use a emery board and little scissors and whatnot. But some of these tools I have found make it easier to create these designs. One of the things I find very important are optivisors. These look like the thing your dentist uses. Here is a picture of me on the right with my optivisor on. But again, you could also use your readers. My friend here did not have an optivisor, so she just put two readers together to magnify what she was looking at. Another tool that's very good, there's a website called Micromark, and they sell these precision tweezers. You can get precision tweezers on Amazon, but these type tend to be really, really good. Then these flush cutters and jewelry tools you can always get online or at Michael's or something like that, and they can really help you. This Dremel rotary tool and workstation is basically a drill press for the Dremel drill. I love this. I mean, here's a video of how you can go in with a soybean and put a hole in it so that you can string them for pearls. So with this workstation, here's another thing you can do. You're hands-free. This one on the left clearly is. I have a sanding tool on there now that's going round and round. It's a rotary. And I'm sanding a little nubbin off one of my pearls to make it nice and smooth. On the right there, you can hold the piece, use a template, and drill a hole where you want it. It's just so fabulous. So speaking of the mushroom that I was talking about, how do you go from the mushroom that looks like this to something that looks like this, and then ultimately your necklace? So what I do is I start with sanding down the mushroom, and in doing that, you get to the thickness that you want. Now, one of the things I do want to caution you to is that make sure you're outside when you do this. It creates a lot of dust. And even though these pieces are really glamorous, this is what I look like after I've been sanding a mushroom all day. I tend to sand a lot of mushrooms at the same time, so I don't have to do it more than once, every once in a while. And I use a mask and glasses, etc. And that's not a tan, that's all mushroom dust. And then once you get it to the thickness that you want, you put some sort of sealer on. Again, it's very porous. I've learned you need to seal these, and you can use super glue, epoxy, etc. This is how I cut my mushrooms before I detail sand them anyway. This is a jeweler saw and V-slot bench pin, which is a very long way of saying it keeps you away from your counter so you're not going to hurt your kitchen counter. So here's a video of just what this looks like. This is a mushroom that I'm cutting. And as you can see, it goes through the mushroom very easily. And I tend to cut all my pieces out one day. It's like an assembly line. I cut them all out one day, clean everything up, because it does cause a little bit of a dust there. Another thing people ask me is, what kind of glue do I use? There's several kinds I like to use. I love this super glue gel on the left, because this Gorilla brand, because it's not as thin as the super glues that we're used to. And so you have a little bit more time. You can actually put a mound of it on a wax paper, and then you can dip your pieces in it and secure them on your piece without it drying too fast and getting it all over your hands. Of course, you are going to get it on your hands. We all do, but it's not as bad as that really thin stuff. There's a picture of the crazy glue with the brush applicator on the top there. The type of epoxy that I like to use is this Art Resin brand. And I like it because it's food safe. It doesn't have a lot of odor to it at all. And it's just a little bit less toxic than some of these other types of epoxies you can get. And then also these tacky glues that we all use, and I use that quite often. I do like that because it's pliable. These other glues are not pliable. Once you put them on, it's stiff, it's staying. There's no bendability, if there is such a word there. Paint, lots of different kinds of paint depending on what you want. Design Master 24 karat gold on the left is what I like to use. The silver's hard. I've not really found a silver that I've loved, but the one that comes the closest is this Design Master Super Silver. So when it comes to where I store my plant material, I put them in little bins and I have them in the basement. And as much as I'd like to say I'm a neat person, this is what my basement looks like. So my husband built this for me, the storage area, and thinking, oh, she'll stay down there and keep the mess down there. But really what I do is I take everything I need for the day and bring it up and completely take over my kitchen. So here it is in my workspace. I am a whirling dervish when it comes to building these things or making these things. So here's some examples of my botanical arts that I've done, necklaces. You've seen quite a few of these throughout this video. If you have any questions, honestly, I'm very accessible. You can always email me through my website. I'm happy to answer questions. I get a lot of people asking me how you ship things, what kind of piece should I use, where'd you get this material? And I'm very happy to answer any of these questions for anybody who wants to learn more. I love to educate. And the other thing people do ask me is, do I ever wear my pieces? And yes, I do wear them every once in a while, but they're very lightweight. And I've worn them a few times. I've had one fall off and someone gave it back to me. And the other one fell off as I was getting out of the car and I shut it in the door of the car. So I tend not to wear them anymore. And they're very scratchy because it is plant material. So here's a picture of the Botanical Arts book that was written. There were several people that helped me with this. We have 30 different award-winning artists that do a little bit in this. And it really can tell you everything you would want to know about botanical arts. You can order this on Amazon or on my website, sarahboynton.net. The net proceeds go to the GCA, so if you're going to order it, it's best to order it on my website because we don't have to pay the fees to Amazon. The fee will then go to the GCA. So if you're interested, consider ordering that. Now, real quick, here's some examples of other people's work because I just love what we have. We have so many talented people out there. And I don't want to discourage you. This is a very detailed video, but I will say there's just so many different things that you could be doing in this world of botanical arts. And they don't have to be as intricate as some of these pieces, but honestly, it's just a really fun thing to do. And in the book and also on my website, you're more than welcome to look at how to start a workshop for your club. And that's really a great way to start it in getting people excited about this art. And it's really easy to put together. I put together a list of what you might need for a workshop. And one of the things, you know, where to order everything, and it's all there on the website. So again, if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. And I hope you've enjoyed this. Please consider trying because it is really fun and it's meant to be fun. And it's just, I love it, as you can see. Have a great day.